Hello and welcome to this International Society of Automation webinar. My name is Matthew and I will be your Global Spec moderator, and I want to review a few housekeeping items with you before we begin. Please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the operation of the user interface for today's webinar. The large window with the heading Presentation in the upper left is the primary window for today. Just to the right of the main presentation window is the Speaker Bio window with background information on today's presenters. Just below that is the Q&A window. At any time during the presentation, you can enter a question into the box in the lower section of the window and click Submit. Your question will be placed in the queue to address when we get to the Q&A session. At the bottom of your screen, you will see additional buttons to enhance your webinar experience. To see what a particular button does, just place your mouse pointer over it and a tooltip will appear with a description of the button's function. And now, I would like to introduce Liz Neiman. Liz is the Managing Director of Strategic Engagement for the International Society of Automation and will be moderating today's discussion. Liz, welcome to the event. Please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Matt. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Our webinar today is entitled Responsible Disruption: What Engineers Need to Know About Digital Transformation. And we decided to host this webinar because here at ISA, we hear all the time from engineers that this subject is overwhelming. So maybe you feel like you're already behind, or maybe you feel like you're personally up to speed, but you're worried that your company seems not yet ready to catch up to the advances that you're seeing in play in other innovative operational settings. So today's webinar really aims to demystify digital transformation. And we're going to give you some actionable takeaways that will really help add value and grow your career. I'm going to introduce our three subject matter experts who are speaking today. First, I'm going to introduce Steve Mustard, who is an independent automation consultant and a licensed professional engineer who's backed by more than 30 years of engineering experience. He specializes in the development and management of real-time embedded equipment and automation systems. He serves as president of National Automation, Inc., and also served as the 2021 president of ISA. Dave Lafferty is a thought leader in IoT for oil and gas with over 40 years of experience in the industry. He founded Scientific Technical Services to help companies increase performance while improving safety and integrity through the application of technology and process improvement. And Scott Sommer is a licensed professional engineer with 40 plus years of experience in automation, instrumentation, and process control design and applications for design and engineering firms, manufacturers, and service providers. Thank you so much to our three speakers. I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. Our agenda today is divided into four parts. First, we're going to talk about what is digital transformation and why it's relevant to manufacturers. Next, we'll cover some case studies about how digital transformation has been used across different sectors. Then we'll talk about the culture and people element. So what part do engineers, managers, and other stakeholders play? And then finally, at the end, we will have our interactive Q&A. So those questions can be put in the Q&A section at any time as you think of them, but we will be addressing those in one group at the end. All right, let's get started with a quick poll. I want to know how familiar you are personally with digital transformation on a scale of 1 to 5. So 1 being, I'm not really familiar with it, I'm new to the subject, or 5, I'm very familiar with the concepts of digital transformation. So please take a moment and go ahead and vote there on the screen, and then I will switch to the results. Just another few minutes. Please go ahead and submit your votes. How familiar are you with digital transformation? Okay, let's see. All right, that's a pretty nice distribution. Goodness, really kind of all over, but we have some folks who are very familiar. Seems like familiar, somewhat more familiar, and very familiar, lots of folks in that area. But a good distribution. I think there will be something for everyone in today's webinar in terms of what we're addressing. So thank you very much for letting us know where you're at. All right, to begin, we're going to start with Dave Lafferty. This part of the presentation is going to address what is digital information and why is it relevant to manufacturers. Dave, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. Digital transformation, it can be really confusing because everybody sort of has their own definition. Sometimes, suppliers will skew the definition to whatever offering they have. So so we're going to help hopefully demystify some of this. So I've come up with a definition that I like to use, and that is that it's really about fundamentally changing how an organization operates through the adoption of digital technology that increases value. So there's some sort of positive outcome. So it's important that digital transformation really has three major components to it. The first and most important is that change of behavior. You fundamentally have to change the way that your organization behaves in order for it to be transformational in nature. The second part is the digital technology. This is what a lot of the technical community will focus on. But digital transformation can't be transformational if there's not a behavioral change. And then finally, you want to ensure that it actually has a positive outcome to it. So without those three components to it, it really isn't digital transformation. One of the reasons that digital transformation can be a little confusing is there's different types of digitization. And so what I've done is sort of categorize digitization into three broad categories, and then compare that with impact versus the delivery risk or how hard it is to implement. So the first one is making analog processes digital. A good example of this is taking your engineering drawings and scanning them into a PDF so you can go to a computer and view it. It's something lots of people have done. The impact is fairly low, but it's fairly low delivery risk. It's something that, in fact, fairly straightforward. But if you're doing this kind of stuff, you're probably catching up. You're not really gaining a competitive advantage. The second type of digitalization is where you digitize existing workflows. So a good example of that might be operator round and readings, where they go out to the factory floor and take readings and observations and things like that. And what you can do is take away the clipboard and give that operator a handheld, or maybe even some sort of VR type device. So, but the key thing here is that you're optimizing existing workflows, and you're making them more efficient through digital. The implementation risks are a little greater because the technology is more advanced, but the impact is also medium. And the reason it's medium is that you're optimizing current practices, but you're not introducing sort of a new way. Finally, there's digital transformation. And what this really is like we've discussed, it's changing the way that you do business. And so a good example of that might be management by exception, which means you don't go out to that piece of equipment until there's a problem. So you've heavily instrumentated that equipment such that you know what's going on remotely. And then when there's a problem, that's when you go out and you know the correct craft to send out, the correct kind of tools or parts and things like that. So that is fundamentally different than how you might have operated in the past. So that is the three types of digitalization that you can occur. It's important that you have a mixture of all these projects, the quick wins and sort of the medium risk ones, but also some of the transformational. The transformational is very hard, because you're changing behavior. And you'll find that changing that behavior many times is a lot harder than getting the technology to work. So another reason that it's a little confusing is that people sort of interchange Industry 4.0 with digital transformation, and they're very related, but they are fundamentally different. Industry 4.0 sort of means like in the 1800s, there was the introduction of the steam engine. That was the first industrial, revolution. In the 1920s, we had the assembly line. That really changed how we produce goods. In the 1970s, we have industrial robots. And then now we have Industry 4.0, which is how you use digital to gain a competitive advantage. So the key thing is that you can have an Industry 4.0 initiative, but not change behavior. In other words, you could continue to use your assembly lines, but replace, maybe have predictive maintenance on your piece of equipment or things like that. So you aren't necessarily changing behavior. Digital transformation is really hard because of that behavioral change, but the benefits are great. So why? Why are we seeing such interest in digital transformation? Well, first of all, rate of change has accelerated. Think about when Uber came on board. Uber now has become a verb. I'm going to Uberize a process, right? And yellow cab type people got caught flat-footed. Think about Kodak and their, reaction to digital cameras. You also need reduced time to market. Everybody expects new product and new features a lot sooner. So what typically might have been a 5 to 10 year product cycle now has been collapsed to 18 months. Think about how often a new mobile phone comes out, for example. Improved quality. People are expecting very swift incremental increases in quality. So that's now become almost a license to do business kind of thing, is that you have to ensure that quality. Also, many work cultures want to accept and encourage innovation. They want a workplace that sort of encourages that. So digital transformation allows for that. And finally, enhance customer experience. Customers are used to going to Amazon and having a seamless experience. When you engage your customers, there's sort of the expectation now is a lot higher than it was in the past. So those are some of the business drivers behind digital transformation. Some of the benefits your organization, should you go down the digital transformation route, that you should expect to see are, number one, remain competitive. Don't be the yellow cab of the taxi business, right? Another thing is you can end the geographical barriers in many times, because now you can distribute goods and services across the world. You most likely will see an increase employee retention. People ask, why can I engage and manage my own personal finances and I can't manage my company responsibilities in the same way? We need to transform how we do business. Improved customer experience. And then finally, and maybe most important, is you're moving to a very rapid data-driven decision-making. You're finally has visibility into things. I remember one of the equipment, reliability people on the North Slope of Alaska told me was, Dave, I can't manage anything that I can't see. Help me see what's going on in my operations. So that data-driven, rapid decision making is a key benefit of digital transformation.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. It's time for us to take another poll. So now that you've learned more about digital transformation and what it means, we want to hear what you think are the biggest obstacles to putting it in place within a company like yours. So you can select more than one option if you want. And I'm sorry that we don't have a blank to fill in. So hopefully you find one of these that resonates with you. Again, more than one option. You don't have to pick just one, but we want to hear, what do you think are the biggest obstacles to putting digital transformation in place in a company like yours? And I'll just pause for a minute for the responses to start. Okay, we've got several. Let's see what folks thought. Whew, we don't know where to start. It's overwhelming. 42% of our respondents felt that that was the case. But let's look down here at the 15% that say no obstacles here. We are excited. So that's great. This is, these are the types of things that we hear all the time at our digital transformation events and from the engineers that are part of ISA activities. These are really the main concerns that we hear all the time raised about digital transformation. So you are not alone. All right, let's move on to our next presenter, Steve Mustard, who's going to talk about some case studies, how digital transformation has been used across sectors. So Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Liz. I'm going to follow on from what Dave introduced us to and talk using his chart about the three stages that he identified. He talked about digital, digitalization, and digital transformation. And I want to talk about some case studies in the oil and gas industry about how they've experienced the transformation through those stages. Now, important to say that you can look at these case studies and you can argue that maybe something is digital or digitalization or whatever, but hopefully when you've seen the three stages that I'm going to talk about, you'll understand how I'm explaining this. So the first stage, the digital stage, I'm going to talk about digital twin. Now, just like digitalization and Industry 4.0, the phrase digital twin is very widely used and has many, many, many different meanings. And so in this particular context, I want to think about the digital twin as being more basic than maybe some of the advanced digital twins that we might talk about in the digital transformation stage. So Dave mentioned about scanning engineering drawings and making them available electronically as PDFs, for example. A digital twin, let's just think for a moment of taking that a little step further and using some 3D model information you might have, some asset information in the form of a database, and perhaps some of those electronic documents like piping and instrumentation diagrams and general assembly drawings and things like that. Now, you can put all of that together into a package, and you can make it easy for people to navigate around that. It's a big time saver, just like the basic digital converting analog into digital that Dave talked about. It's a huge efficiency saver, but it really is just making things easier for people to do. You're not really transforming substantially how the business operates. You're basically just saying, well, instead of having to open lots of folders and find things and search through them manually, the digital twin allows you to navigate more easily through all of that data. As I said, you can have digital twins that are much more advanced than that. I'm not really talking about that here. But this is a huge step forward. And so in the oil and gas industry, a lot of asset owners have implemented different forms of digital twins, and they've been very successful. But again, to emphasize what Dave said, if you look at the return on the investment for those, they have a return on investment, but it's not transformational. It's not the scale that we would hope to have in some of the other stages. Now, the second stage is where it gets more interesting. So Dave mentioned about digitalizing rounds and readings, for instance. I'm focusing on, in this particular case, an example where we take what we did in the first stage, which is the digital stage, where we implemented the digital twin. We put all of our documents together. We put all of our information together into one place so that we can more easily find things and more easily plan things. Now what we want to do is to actually go out there in the field and do something that we do today, but we want to do that much more efficiently than we do at the moment. And in fact, potentially, reduce the amount of time spent in the field and maybe even reduce the number of people involved in doing it. So in the oil and gas industry, you have a mixture of onshore and offshore facilities. The amount of cost and time that's involved in those locations varies. But if I focus particularly on the offshore world, you're talking about facilities which can be 130 miles offshore, for instance, in the middle of the sea, only accessible via helicopter or boat, very expensive to travel there, very limited bed space when you're there. So the ability to have people there to do things is very constrained. And planning all the multitude of different activities that you need to do in the facility to keep it operating, to keep it safe, to keep it producing efficiently is a huge challenge. And because that facility, which is made of steel, which is sitting there in a highly corrosive atmosphere, you have to do things like constantly inspect it, for example. So you have to send people out who do things like general visual inspection, where they go around and look at things and identify areas that look corroded, for example. And then close visual inspection, where they need to go real close and take real close photographs, or they do some kind of X-ray or thermal imaging to identify where the problem really is and how deep it really is. And that's a very, very labor-intensive process. Not only is it a labor-intensive process, it's a very expensive process. It puts people in harm's way because these facilities are inherently hazardous. And you end up in a situation where a typical facility, because of all the constraints that we have and because of the cost and because of the limited bed space, you may literally perpetually be inspecting that facility. By the time you've completed the inspection of the entire facility, it may be time to start again. So we want to try and find a way to improve on all of that, because if it's going to take years, literally, to inspect a facility, and that facility is corroding and becoming potentially hazardous because you might have a loss of containment through a leak, for example, how do you identify those things before they become hazardous? If it's going to take you years to do that, how do you focus the people in the right areas, for instance? So one of the ways oil and gas companies have done that is to introduce some digitalization level technology, where you can see in the photographs here, you're using things like intrinsically safe tablets, where you can have all the PDFs of all the engineering information you would need from the previous stage on the tablet itself, so you don't have to carry folders around with you. And you can also record information on there as you go around, so you're not actually writing anything down. You're not having to aggregate all that information once you come back from doing the data collection. It's all collected in real time. And that is not only a huge time saving, but it's much more effective in terms of how the process works. So we can do things like reduce the number of people who need to go to the facility to do the inspection. We can also do the inspection more quickly, so we can find problems more quickly. So huge benefits that are generated. So again, we're not quite at the digital transformation stage of benefits, but we're making much more significant improvements than we would just from the digital stage alone. I also showed there some other examples using more novel technology, virtual reality and augmented reality. In this case, these are HoloLens augmented reality glasses. And you can do some very impressive things with those that look good, but actually, again, make huge efficiency savings and huge operational savings in how you do things. So in particular, the picture at the bottom is an inspector, quality inspector, and you can tell by their grey hair that they're very experienced. And one of the challenges that they've alluded to about the culture change, about the need to kind of change how the organization works, which is a key part of digital transformation, it's very difficult to have people who've been doing things for 40 or 50 years in a particular way to get them to do things differently. But we had huge success in this particular example, changing the behaviors, because they saw personally the benefits of using this new technology and how they did things, saving all the paperwork that they had to do, saving time on site so they could be home more often, all of those benefits that benefited them personally as well as the organization. So the third stage then, if we go from digital through digitalization, is to digital transformation. So far we've got rid of our paper, we've made it electronic. Now we've also introduced some tools where we can make the process more efficient and streamlined and more effective, and we can have significant business benefit. But we still haven't essentially changed everything. We've got maybe fewer inspectors, we've maybe spent less time offshore, but we still haven't fundamentally changed how we do something like inspection. Digital transformation now is where we really look at how are we going to change the process, in this case of inspection. So artificial intelligence is something that is used widely in the field of computing to do all kinds of things that we maybe are aware of and maybe are not aware of in terms of how organizations run their businesses. Machine learning is a particular branch, if you like, of artificial intelligence, where what we want to do is to train the computer, or allow the computer to learn itself from some data set, how to do something itself going forward. So one of the things we could do here is we can use machine learning to analyze imagery that we can capture of a facility and train it with data sets about what looks good, what looks bad, so that when it looks at new images from a facility, it can identify potential areas of corrosion. And not only identify potential areas of corrosion, but also categorize that corrosion. So if we use 3D imagery, for instance, like laser scans, which have depth as well as the 2 dimensions that you would normally have in a photograph, then not only can you identify corrosion potentially by changes in color and changes in perspective, but you can also then measure potentially the depth of that corrosion on a pipe or a vessel, and use that information to help you categorize the potential areas of corrosion, and then provide that information to the inspectors on shore so that they can plan their other activities more efficiently and spend, again, less time offshore. So this is something that is very new in the oil and gas industry. This is something that's really only in the last few years where people have been starting to try this out. But this is a real digital transformation example, because this is the kind of thing that if this can become successful, can be proven, then we are talking about doing things like reducing, not removing, but reducing the number of inspectors who need to be physically present by a significant number, and very much changing the way inspections work. Now, a lot of the inspection process is regulated. Like the American Petroleum Institute, for instance, has standards and regulations that organizations must follow in terms of this. So it's not something that organizations can just change on their own. But as time moves on and as this technology becomes more proven, then this is definitely the way we expect the industry to go. So we go from capturing our information in a digital way, and then using digital tools to make things better, but then actually really introducing this transformation element to really do things very different. One last point I wanted to make about this is that another huge benefit of this machine learning technology when we're doing something like inspection is that not only can you train something to find things automatically and look at thousands and thousands of images, which obviously a human practically can't do because it's very tedious and they're bound to miss things if they do that on a scale like that. But if you give 5 inspectors the same image and you ask them to grade the corrosion, you're going to get potentially 5 different answers because there's a lot of bias in there. What one person thinks is severe corrosion might be what someone thinks is mild corrosion, and so on. So one of the benefits of machine learning is that you get a much more repeatable process in there. And the more data sets that it receives and consumes and processes, then the more reliable the results can be. So over time, this is only going to get better and better in terms of producing results, which then asset owners can really change how they operate their businesses. Okay, so I think, Liz, we have time for another poll.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Steve. I'm going to now give you a little test. Nothing too scary, I promise. Just to test what you've learned from Steve's part of the presentation. I'm going to ask 2 questions. So there's going to be 2 separate polls. And we're going to ask about some of those buzzwords that you hear all the time in automation engineering. And you're going to say if you think that those fall under digital, digitalization, or digital transformation. So those 3 categories that Steve just described. So let's begin with our first, augmented reality. That buzzword is all over the place. Where do you think that belongs? Is that digital, digitalization, or digital transformation? And I will just pause a moment for you all to vote. I see we got some thumbs up and thumbs downs, which is great. We're looking for votes on the categories up there: digital, digitalization, and digital transformation. All right, results are coming in. Just give me one moment and I will advance to our results. All right, here we go. Digital transformation, interesting. Well, now, Steve, I would say that falls under digitalization in the example that you showed. What do you think?
Yes, that's right. Yes. It's hard, as I said, because you can argue, depending on the application and how it's used, that it could be digital transformation. But in this particular context, we're talking about taking a process and really only applying digital technology to it. It just happens to be augmented reality in this case, which sounds quite fancy, but you're really still doing an inspection just in a more efficient way.
Got it. That makes sense. All right, just one more. Now the buzzword is machine learning. Machine learning. Where do you think that fits? Is that digital, digitalization, or digital transformation? Waiting for your votes to come in. Please pick one of those terms that you think best fits machine learning. All right, submissions are coming in. Here we go. Our results, digital transformation. Well done. Excellent. That was a really cool example that you gave, Steve. That really resonated. Pretty neat stuff.
Thank you.
All right, let's go to our final subject matter expert today is Scott Sommer, who is going to present on the culture and people element. So what part do engineers, managers, and other stakeholders play in digital transformation? And with that, Scott, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. The title of the overall presentation had responsible disruption in it, and it certainly is responsible disruption because it goes way beyond just the technical aspects of digital transformation and digitalization. It also reaches into other groups in your facilities and in your corporations that perhaps you had not thought about before, or maybe the simple project that we're going to discuss one in a little bit, you didn't realize it would touch so many different groups within the organization. Dave talked about behavioral changes, and that automatically would indicate that there's some element of people in there. And he also talked about changing the culture. Steve talked a little bit about the inspector who has 40 years of experience and now has to do something perhaps in a different way. So that is disruption, and it's also requiring a change in behavior, but hopefully the end result will give us a much better result than what we had before that initiative was undertaken. Of course, Digital transformation is tech-driven, but requires input and participation from a lot of different other groups: engineering, maintenance, operations, regulatory affairs, IT, just to name a few. And so in this section, I'm going to introduce you to the digital transformation roadmap, look at the different groups that are going to participate in some simple example that I will give later, look at some of the challenges and roadblocks that you can expect to encounter and how to overcome those particular roadblocks. The culture and people aspect of this particular topic goes into a lot of different, there are a lot of different aspects to this. Digital transformation really involves the way that we'll be using digital technology to change the way, and in our case in manufacturing, it would be the workflow of how the organization does business. We're going to talk a little bit about the journey that we're going to undertake in digital transformation and understand that when we involve all these different groups, sometimes our projects will be meticulously planned, but as everyone knows, projects often take detours or unexpected issues arise. And so digital transformation isn't just going to be a set of tasks that we could put on a Gantt chart and execute. It's really going to be a series of different initiatives, projects, and tasks that are all together going to lead us to an endpoint. So some of our initiatives will fail, some of them will succeed, others will provide useful feedback. So no matter what project we undertake in our digital transformation process, we're going to learn something along the way. And that we have to also understand that not all strategies that we're going to employ are going to lead to remote single push button autonomous operation from your beach chair down in Florida. It's going to require a series of, we'll just call them baby steps, that will take us from one level to another. And so when we look at the different groups that are involved, or different aspects we need to look at digital transformation projects from, obviously technology, that's what we are most likely familiar with: the hardware, the software, the sensors, the movement of data from those items into data repositories. We also look at the tech transfer. How do we transfer this knowledge from one location to another? We might get involved with tools like multivariable variant data analysis that will allow us to take that data and convert it into useful information. Steve talked about digital twins. There's all kinds of topics that we could get into in data integration. How do we integrate the incoming warehouse data with manufacturing and then out to storage, product storage, and shipping. And so those are all the technology aspects. And those are the ones that are probably most familiar to us. But what about the people and culture items? What tasks are people doing now? What SOPs are they following? What standards do they need to meet? How are they executing their workflow now? Like Stephen mentioned, there's people who have done this for many, many years. And now we may be asking them to do something different. Whereas we may have been writing down values on a clipboard as part of our batch data recording. Now we're asking them to verify the information in a control system, HMI. And that's a shift. That's a shift in what they're doing, a shift in their workflow. How are they going to be able to adapt to that? They were able to take a clipboard, walk up to the particular instrument, write down the value, but now we'll have to walk to a different location to view it on a screen and may not actually be able to see that particular sensor. And so there's some release of control that they're going to have in order to employ many of these types of digital transformation projects. What kind of skills do they have? Are we asking our technicians to deal with digital technologies that they don't have the background or the training in? And so we'll have to provide that for them. What kind of cultural items do we have? Is it a union shop? How many shifts? How are the employees engaged in decision-making in the plant? And so we're asking them to do things differently, and that really is a people and culture issue. We also have business capabilities. What are the QA processes for the organization? What kind of laboratory facilities are there? Does this particular company work globally with the same SOPs and the same technology across sites, or are there differing technologies across the sites? What kind of training? What kind of training documentation do they have? Is this an ISO 9000 certified company that needs to do things in a certain way, or has, let's say, some additional steps that need to be taken when these workflows are changed? What kind of initiatives are being rolled out in the company? Are they mainly local or are they global? So all of these things go into the business capability aspect of digital transformation projects. And then we also have the regulatory considerations: OSHA, FDA, EPA, and others, USDA if we're talking about food and meat production. So all of these regulatory agencies have standards, they have accepted ways of doing things. I work in the biotech and biopharma industry, and so FDA is always on our mind as to what they will accept. And so there are certain procedures, certain sensors that are accepted as generally accepted good engineering practice. And if a new technology comes along, how are these regulatory agencies going to view those particular new technologies? So when we want to execute projects within our facilities that will lead to a higher level of digital transformation, we need to know where we're starting from. So we say this is the roadmap that we'll use to benchmark our progress toward digital maturity. Are we dealing with a pre-digital plant? And this would be a plant that has limited or basic PLC controls, maybe, like I said before, someone walking around with a clipboard writing down the data. Or have digital silos been created, where I've got some level of MES system in place, I'm collecting data into a data historian, but I'm really not doing much beyond that. And then going into the connected plant, here's where I'm going to start getting into the paperless realm. Rather than writing things on a clipboard, I'm going to do it through an HMI or some other electronic means, maybe even handheld devices. I've got some coordination between my automated systems like plant automation, MES, and our ERP system. And operational data is going to flow so that I can electronically access that data and use it for analysis. A predictive plant is pretty much what it says. It's going to use all of the data that's been collected in some means to predict either operation, maintenance requirements, or predict changes that need to be made in either the process, the formulation. So this is the pretty much the area in which most plants now are going to strive to achieve. The adaptive plant is sort of the plant of the future, fully automated execution, no human participation. This is your fully autonomous plan. It's plug and play recipes, plug and play hardware, plug and play IT. It's automatic scale up and scale down based on rate of orders that you're getting. And so it's something that is desirable, but no one's really been able to do that yet. And so where are you on the continuum is very important to understand before you undertake these projects in order to make sure that you're always moving forward in your digital maturity. So we want to define projects and initiatives to do that, to progress toward digital maturity. And then we need to reassess our progress because priorities are going to change over time. If you're manufacturing a good, you're going to have SKUs that are going to be introduced into the system and taken out. So you may not be producing tomorrow what you're producing today. And so it may require a different level of digital transformation or a different approach to digital transformation. Not everything we're going to want to do is going to work out the way we want it to. We're going to run into roadblocks. Legacy systems. Let's say that we have a completely relay or instrumented system where we have relay logic, let's say in a shutdown system. How do we digitize that? How do we digitally transform that system? For many systems, it may be a replacement required. In others, it may be introducing an interface card or doing something different. But legacy systems are always going to be one of the bigger roadblocks for existing facilities. Lack of funding. Lack of funding goes hand in hand with really the bottom bullet, the risk-averse culture. And those that are not in a type of company that has a culture of change, a culture of taking risks, then it may be very difficult to get funding. There may be competing priorities. There's only a certain amount of money available for capital improvement or maintenance. And so our job as engineers is going to be to convince our management that these particular types of initiatives are going to have a significant payback. We talked about the regulatory challenges and the organizational structure friction. If I have a unionized plant, it may be more difficult to institute work flow changes. If I have an ISO 9000 plant, it may take a longer period of time and more people involved and more documentation in order to do the same thing. So those types of organizational structure items are going to be very important as well. Here's one that's near and dear to my heart, and I think many of you will find that to be the case as well. Misalignment between the business IT and manufacturing OT systems. It's very difficult to use the data that we generate on the plant floor if we can't get it to the systems that are going to be able to use that data to produce actionable information. We may have multivariate data analysis tools that live at the business IT level, but if they're unable to get that data in real time from the plant floor, it's going to be very difficult to use that for predictive maintenance and other purposes. So business IT and manufacturing OT, we talk a lot about the convergence of IT and OT, and that can be a roadblock for implementation of digital transformation projects. So how do we get rid of, let's see, I gotta push this over there. Good, so how do we get rid of the roadblocks? Well, we need to understand what it is we're trying to do. We can propose a digital transformation project. It should be based on an actual use case, something that the plant actually needs, not just, oh, this is a great technology, I want to put it in the plant. Digital twin sounds great, but what are you going to use it for? What's the benefit? What's the value that's going to come out of it? And so we need to be able to assess where we are, do some analysis and summary, look at our roadmap and prioritization, identify the business case that we want to implement, and then go out and implement. So we want to focus on the business or use case and start with a technology that is going to be viable for that particular use case. We may want to do some things with wireless or fiber optics or some other technologies like 5G, but if they're not practical for the problem that we're trying to solve, it's not going to end up as being a viable project, or even worse, it's a project and it doesn't have a very good result or no payback. And so we want to start with an initiative that returns value. Once we've identified that, we can look at how to progress. Like I said before, I'm in the biotech and pharma industries, and I would almost pick an example from there, but I decided to pick one that's a little bit more universal across all industries. I worked in 7 different industries, and every one of them had to run into this problem, or I've run into this problem before with chillers, just a normal chilled water skid that's a utility for the plant. Currently, status, digital input, an alarm digital input to the PLC, and an outlet temperature. It may actually have a set point going back as an analog output, but a hardwired interface. So now our digital transformation project is going to look at connecting the chiller package with a TCP/IP interface, bring in that controller data back to the control system, and look at that data, use it for analysis, performance, and trends over time. It may be the lead lag status. It could be condenser evaporator pressures and temperatures, hours of runtime, any diagnostic information, trends, and the whole purpose here may be to improve our predictive maintenance program at the plant. And so if I get a status or an alarm, it doesn't tell me very much other than I'm either on or off and I'm in alarm. It doesn't say what the alarm is. So data from the chiller may be lost if we don't connect it to our control system. So what we'll do is we'll use some sort of a road mapping tool, and the one that I'm showing here is one that's put out by Bioforum. It's one of many tools. It's by no means the only one that's out there. It's just a way to identify where you are. So for this particular plant that wants to undergo digital transformation project to upgrade these chillers, we see that currently we're past the pre-digital plant. We've got automation in the system. We have instrumentation in the system. We see that we're now in the digital silo phase, and we have some automated systems for most processes in level 1. We have some limited integration and data transfer, and that's evidenced by what we're trying to do is get more data out of the chiller. Some systems are specific to the site. Other sites in our organization aren't using this yet. And where we don't have connections, we're either recording that data or doing something different to collect that data. So we're starting from pretty much a digital silo standpoint, and we want to go to a more connected plant type of situation. So that's technology. How about people? What type of people items do we have to look at? If I look at the pre-digital plant, it looks at cultures that are focused on paper processes and forms. It looks at IT and automation as support personnel and have some added value to the business, but not really used to a great deal. And that IT is a customer service that is reactive to problems that we may have. Digital silo phase is technology capabilities are site-based, not centrally harmonized. And so for the plant that I've used as an example, it's about 75% of the way to getting past that particular phase and into the connected plant. And so as I look here, it shows that my next step is to be able to bring a lot of this data in, to use that digital technology to improve my organization or my operation, and have user interfaces, screens, other information that's able to be conveyed to the operator to improve that automation. So during this road mapping process, we figure out where we are and where we can go based on the project that is at hand. And so what can we do to help drive this project? Now that we've got it identified what we want to do, we want to connect very simply the chiller interface to our control system. We need to identify who's going to be affected by this. Management, operations, IT, engineering, regulatory agencies all play a part. We need to understand what they need to know and what they would need to know in order to approve this particular project. So we're going to develop the roadmap. We're going to look at how this data would be used. We're going to define the scope, the cost, the value. We're going to determine our success criteria and then determine the risk. And that's very important to do all of those things. Then we're going to actually execute the project. I show here kind of a Scrum type implementation. Whatever method you use to execute projects at your site, go for it. So we're going to execute the project, and then the last step is to look at, were the objectives met? Did we do what we said we were going to do? Were cost and schedule on target? And what value was returned to the company? And that's very important that you pick a project when you first start your digital transformation projects. Pick one where you're going to win. If you have a loser to start with, guess what? You're probably not going to be able to do the next project. And so there's a lot of philosophy behind this on how to approach all these digital transformation projects. And that was just one project. You're going to probably come up with 50 or 60 different things at your site that you could do. They all need to be prioritized. They can't all be done at once, but all of them are going to help move you down that road to digital maturity.
All right, thank you so much, Scott. We're going to go ahead and proceed to the interactive Q&A portion. And I recognize we don't have a ton of time left, so apologies if your particular question doesn't get asked, but we will try to get to just as many of those as we possibly can. I'm going to start with a question about regulatory challenges. So we'd like to hear a little bit more about some examples of regulatory challenges that might be roadblocks to digital transformation. Any thoughts there?
I can give one example, and I'm sure Scott had a few as well that he can give. So in the example that I gave about inspection, I mentioned API, the American Petroleum Institute. They control the regulations regarding inspections of pressure vessels and piping. And at the moment, there is no way that you can use machine vision or artificial intelligence to replace the need to have people doing inspections, because that's the regulations. That, I think, will change over time. And so there'll be a lot of push from operators to get API to understand that machine vision can actually replace or at least complement what people do. And so I expect the regulations will change. But at the moment, they don't. So we can only complement what is done at the moment. We can't fully change it because of regulations.
Yeah, just a quick example from the FDA. Validation is a very important process that all life science manufacturers follow. And the big concern for the manufacturers is, will the FDA approve or accept methodologies that we've adopted? And there are standard methodologies throughout the industry that are well known, and companies tend to follow them. But we're starting to see a trend now toward automatic validation processes through software. How do you validate that software is actually working correctly? It may be millions of lines of code and perform tens of thousands of different tasks. How do I prove to the FDA that that software is going to produce the right result and repeatable results for the inputs that are given? And so there's a hesitation to use some of that software that can really save time and be a lot more accurate than humans can be. But how do we convince the regulatory agency that it really does work the way it says it does?
That's great. Thank you so much. All right, next up we have a combo question, and it's for Steve. It's several questions that came out of some specific details from your presentation. So I'm going to ask them kind of all in a row, and you can pick which ones you want to address in which order. The first is, can you please explain how to access a document from a central repository? The next is, do you embed geomatic information in your PDF forms? Do you export BOM models into 3D PDFs? And then in the example of using AI to see corrosion on a vessel, is the idea that there are cameras there instead of people? So some good technical questions there for Steve.
Great. Thanks, Liz. Yeah, so let me try and quickly go through that. Central repositories. So the examples that I talked about, it's all very much based on having centralized document management systems, inspection systems, and other things, which obviously are located in the cloud on shore. And in the examples that you saw with the tablets, people are actually accessing them in a couple of different ways. Depending on the facility age, they may download that information from the accommodation facility onto the tablet before they go out onto the deck to do the inspection. In more modern facilities, then we have Wi-Fi throughout the facility, including the hazardous areas, so they can actually be live with that tablet and walk around and actually access those central systems electronically and in real time. The geomatic information, I assume you mean like geospatial coordinates, for instance. So the digital twin is an example of bringing that together. So taking things like PDFs of B&IDs, for example, but then also providing geospatial information in the form of 3D models, and then being able to relate the location physically with something that's on a two-dimensional document is something that the digital twin is very good at. And then you can obviously translate that into things like the tablet and the HoloLens that you saw very easily. And then BOMs. Yes. So again, in the examples that we talk about, we actually have all the engineering information there, including the BOM, and we can actually make that available in, for instance, construction or inspection isometrics that can be downloaded to tablets as well. And then the last question about the imagery. So the imagery that you saw there is captured using laser scan technology. So they're the ones that we're talking about here, they're tripod mounted. They're cameras which capture a 360 image, high resolution, but they also capture a laser scan in the same time. It takes about 2 minutes to scan, and then you move the tripod around and you capture different areas. So a typical facility offshore might be 5,000 locations that you scan. It's a very manual process at the moment. You can use technology like drones to capture imagery, but you can't get the resolution that you need to in order to do AI. So you have to use that kind of terrestrial technology, if you like, the tripod mounted stuff. So you capture all that imagery in one go, like it may take 3, 4, 5 weeks to do that in a facility, and you process all that imagery, and then you analyze it all in a batch, and then you kind of do that periodically, depending on how often you want to do it, say once a year, once every 2 or 3 years, for instance. So that's it. Very quick run through those things, Liz.
That's awesome. Thank you, Steve. Very informative. We are technically at time, but we have a lot of really great questions. So I think we're just going to go a few minutes over to hope that we can address as many of the questions as possible. Let's see. Here in the adaptive plant model, we heard that local staff are only needed for certain critical or emergency situations. So this question is about what examples have you seen? And what if the local team is not as skilled as the remote team? Is there still a good way for them to work together, even in an emergency?
Yeah, I can take that one. After BP had their major Gulf of Mexico spill, I got an all expense paid trip to London to talk about safety. And the head of safety said his big concern is, what do I do? What will the junior person at 2 a.m. do? And that is the root risk. So this is a great question. And that's where a lot of the augmented, reality can really help, where you can have something as simple as effectively a Zoom call, to where the more junior person can connect with the expert remotely and say, this is what I'm looking at. Do I turn it left or do I turn it right? Those kinds of things. It can be real simple, all the way up to the Google Glasses kind of thing, where it says, bring me all that additional information so I can make a better informed thing. But that's one of the big aspects of it, is that now you can leverage those experts remotely, and they don't have to actually go on site to help with a situation.
Excellent. That's a great example. Thank you so much. I think we have time for 2 more questions. I'm going to start with this one. Do you think the commitment to sustainability and ESG will be a primary driver and catalyst to expediting companies' digital transformation?
I can take that one also, without question. When I talk to the C-suite in all the various energy aspects, the 2 things that they're interested in is, how do I lower my my carbon footprint of my existing operations, and then how do I transition to non-carbon energy? And digital is a big part of that. So because it's part of that changing behavior, and digital can be that catalyst for changing that behavior. If you look at where the funding for projects go these days, those 2 areas have a lion's share of the funding from the various companies. So definitely it'll be a huge catalyst.
That's great, Dave. Thank you. All right, one last question, sort of philosophical. Should every company be aiming for digital transformation? And do you think there are some cases where getting partway there is good enough? What do you think?
I can answer that one. There are plenty of companies who will never reach the adaptive plant level for a number of different reasons. What we found in the biotech and biopharm and life sciences industry is that the average journey along that digital transformation pathway is about level 2.5 at current. And talking to the technology leaders and the business leaders in life sciences, they will be very happy to reach level 4 and feel that that will give them a great benefit and value. As we move from left to right along that continuum, it gets a lot more expensive. So many companies don't foresee that they can get to that autonomous single push button type operation, and that what's right for them is something a little bit less, but still very, very useful. We also ran into some companies, basically medical device manufacturers, who are not really in, let's say, the technology business from a data standpoint, and they have a lot longer way to go. They don't have as many installed facilities for data collection, et cetera. They're getting better. But if you were to ask them what's appropriate, you'd probably get a little bit less aggressive timeline and set of initiatives for digital transformation. So it very much is company dependent.
Great, thank you so much. All right, just a few slides here that I'd like to review. If you're looking for more information on digital transformation and some other resources from ISA, we're happy to provide those to you. We do have a brand new digital transformation training series that's just been launched that provides you with all the tools that you're going to need to effectively participate in digital transformation projects. The first course is now available. It's an introduction to IIoT, the Industrial Internet of Things. That's a self-paced modular course, so you don't have to wait for it to roll around in the schedule. You can sign up anytime. There's a link there, but there's also a QR code if you'd like to scan that. And then also we have some exciting events coming up this year, in person or virtually. These are some of them specific to digital transformation. You see there's one in Brazil in September and one in Australia in November. But I will say these topics that we've talked about today are going to be addressed at any ISA event, regardless of whether it has digital transformation in the title or not. So the OT Cybersecurity Summit in Aberdeen, and also our flagship Automation and Leadership Conference, which will be in Colorado Springs this year in October. All of these topics will be covered at those events as well. And again, you can join us in person or virtually at isa.org/events. You can learn more about those and register for them as well once the registration is open. I want to thank you so much for being such an active and engaged audience. This was an awesome Q&A session, really great questions for our speakers, so thank you. Thank you too to our wonderful subject matter experts, Dave, Steve, and Scott, who did an excellent job today. And this has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us to learn more about digital transformation. Matt, I'll throw to you.
Thank you, Liz. And again, I just want to echo a big thank you to all three of our presenters today. That was wonderful. And also, we'd like to thank our audience members for being part of this event. You will be receiving an email from us with a link to the on-demand version of this presentation, so you can come back and watch this again or share it with your colleagues. And lastly, please take a moment to complete a survey which will appear on your screen at the end of this live webinar. For on-demand viewers, you will find the survey located along the bottom of your attendee console in the survey widget. Again, thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar event. Take care, and we will talk with you soon.